wonderful audio system, which also means, and I should probably warn folks, that I can hear everything you say in the background. And you can probably hear me when I whisper. Isn't that kind of cool? This is great. No flow through here. Anyway, I am really, really excited to introduce you to our wonderful speaker tonight. I have had the sincere pleasure of spending the last day and a half with Dr. Arredondo, who worked with myself and Dr. DeAndrea to set up her visit, and I'll let him say a few words after this. But I'm just going to give you a brief overview of this wonderful speaker that you're about to experience. Dr. Arredondo has dedicated her career to advancing social justice, cultural competency development, Latinx mental health education, and organizational diversity strategy. She's been a servant leader in the American Counseling Association and the American Psychological Association. She's served as president of ACA and was the first Latina to be president. She has served as the president of the Society for Psychological Study of Culture, Ethnicity, and Race, and is the founding president of the National Latinx Psychological Association. Dr. Arredondo has co-authored the foundational multicultural counseling competencies of the American Counseling Association and the multicultural guidelines for APA. She's an author of multiple publications and training videos. She's a scholar and a licensed psychologist. She is the author of more than 100 publications, bilingual counseling videos. She has 7 books that reflect her research interests in diversity-driven organizational initiatives, Latinx mental health, women's leadership, and the application of multicultural guidelines for professional development. Her most recent book is Latinx Immigrants Transcending Acculturation and Xenophobia. And she's in preparation for a book on unhealthy work environments for STEM women in higher education. She speaks both nationally and internationally on these topics, and her works have been cited in published articles and books over 10,000 times. Some of us in here actually cited her a fair amount in her own work. So in the Academy, Dr. Arredondo has served as president of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology on the Chicago campus and is Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs for the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She was a full professor with Arizona State and at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She's a licensed psychologist and national certified counselor. And she's president right now of the Arredondo Advisory Group and faculty fellow with the Fielding Graduate University. On a personal note, and I told this story earlier, so it's not quite as, I remember first, I had read a lot of Dr. Arredondo's work, and it was in 2004. I was at a conference for American Counseling Association, and they had the Living Legends. And those of you, how many of you are taking theories or have taken a theories class? So on that stage were the Living Legends of theories. And it was Albert Ellis, William Glasser, Crumboldt, I'm missing, Carlson.
Did you say Ellis, Crumboldt, Glasser, Carlson?
I just looked at these, yeah. And Dr. Arredondo. So not only was she the only person of color on the stage, she was the only woman on the stage. And I remember very clearly seeing her out there and realizing that there was a space for us in this world of counseling. I found the video today, I just sent her the link. And it was just really cool to rewatch it 15 years after the fact and to have known that I have the opportunity to spend time with her. I'm more excited that you all get the opportunity to listen to her over the next hour or so. So I'm going to pass it on. Michael, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just a couple things. Thank you for all your help in making this happen. I informally knew Dr. Arredondo through her writings in the 80s, but I had the distinct pleasure of joining with her and several of our colleagues, Daryl Sue, Thomas Parham, Judy Daniels, Alan Ivey, Mary Ivey, and others who are well known in the field, in formulating the National Institute for Multicultural Competence. In 1993, Dr. Arredondo and I joined together to do a monthly column in the the American Counseling Association's monthly newspaper that went out to everyone. So that's over 100 publications. We went from 1993 to 2006, very faithfully getting an article out on social justice and multicultural competence. In the tradition, as I see and have learned from you, you come from a tradition of true social justice. And I remember you helping me gain insights into Cesar Chavez, who had tremendous impact on you. And while he has broken the road for justice, you have, along with others, have helped pave that road. And now it's up to this generation to build and keep that road going toward the justice and mental health and healthy human development. So I just want to end by saying this is an important scholar in the field. It's a colleague who I've worked with in research and writing and helping to foster individual change, and she's a sister beloved. So give her a round of applause and a warm welcome from the table.
Buenas tardes, everyone. Can you say buenas tardes? Que bueno, okay. So we want to make sure that we practice a language that's spoken by many people here in Springfield, by the way. And so I wanted to welcome you that way and thank Allison and Miguel for also their warm introductions, because it is a pleasure to be here at Springfield College. Just by way of context, I lived in Boston for 30 years. I never developed the accent, but I feel a great affinity for Boston and of course Springfield. But I told Allison when I was living out here, I would just drive past Springfield to go to Hartford or to go to Albany or go to Hartford and then go down to New York City. But still, it's a place along the Mass Pike that I always recognize. I saw the sign, so I feel very welcome here. I like your campus very much. I like your program. I met with the president and other women leaders for lunch today, and we had a really great conversation about women's leadership, which is one of my very, very favorite topics. Again, I think all of you are in a profession of counseling that really has a lot to offer society. And I think the fact that you've chosen this profession says a lot probably about your values, your commitment to people, your commitment to help people and their well-being. And I thank your professors for bringing you to this lecture tonight as well. How many of you are in clinical mental health counseling? All right. Rehab counseling? 2 of you. All right, let's see. School. All right. General? This is what they call general. What other area do you have, Allison?
We have some athletic counselors here.
Oh, athletic counselors.
And student affairs administration.
Okay, and who's student affairs? Okay, I feel like I'm missing some people.
Art therapy?
Art therapy? Who else didn't have their identity called? Or you didn't raise your hand? Huh? It just feels like I didn't see enough hands go up. Well, okay. But we shall continue, and I want to thank Allie ahead of time for pressing the button on my presentation here. So, all of you are in different classes. Some of you are in the diversity class. Some of you are in the skills class. Is that correct? Foundations. Psychopharm. Is anyone in that class too? Yeah. So we have a range of students in this class. How many of you are first year? Second year? Any third year students in here? Okay. Okay, so you're all going to graduate in 2 years, correct? That's the plan? Okay, very good. Okay, so I have a couple other questions. I want you to think for a second or two. What question would you have of me as it relates to my presentation on counselors leading through cultural competence? What question do you have? What question comes to mind? Okay, you all have cell phones? Okay, just write it in your notes. Or if you have a piece of paper you want to write it on, what question comes to mind regarding counselors leading through cultural competence? Because I'm going to come back and ask you to share your question, not at the beginning here, but as we go through the presentation. Okay, so you have a minute to write your question down. those of you who have to leave early, what time are you leaving? Okay, just checking. Okay, got it. Thank you. All right. And I'm going to try move around a little bit, even though I have a bad foot, but it's hard for me to just stand there. So just to tell you that I'm trying to move. What was the thing I was going to say now? I just lost my train of thought. I just wanted to say, in addition to what Allison and Michael said, I've been in the field of counseling for many years. I started as a school counselor, just to those of you who are in school counseling, I started as a high school counselor in Brookline, Massachusetts. And then after I graduated from my doctoral program, I started teaching at the University of New Hampshire. So I went to Boston College and Boston University for my doctoral degree, and then started teaching in UNH for a year, and then went back to Boston because I had a grant that I had to administer, and it was written for me to do this at a bilingual counselor training program at BU, so I went back to Boston. So I spent those 30 years in Boston, and then I decided to leave the university and start a consulting company, where my focus in my consulting company, which was called Empowerment Workshops, was about empowering people in the workplace to make change for themselves and working with companies to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So I did that in Boston for 13 years. And then I decided to rejoin the university world. And I went to Arizona State University for 7 years. I was a professor there and became a senior administrator in student affairs. Then I decided, well, I enjoy it, but I really like the academic affairs side, which where most of my colleagues are right now. So I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I was the Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. So that's kind of like in the Provost's office, if you know the structure of universities. And then and then after that, once you're an administrator, you move around. That's what I have to tell you. Most people don't promote from within when it comes to administrators. And I went from Milwaukee to Chicago to become the president of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in Chicago. And for me, all of those experiences taught me a lot about leadership, about the role of counselors, and our skills to be leaders, because it's all people work. Everything you do as a leader is about working with people. And when you're an administrator at a university, they will tell you 75% of your work is around human resources. That means people. So I spent a lot of time in the area of developing people, helping people become faculty, graduate students graduate, and everything had a cultural competence lens to it. I could not have done that had I not been prepared in understanding that cultural differences matter. Cultural differences are part of everyone's life on a daily basis, whether you're doing counseling or you're walking around campus, you're always having a cross-cultural encounter. I just want you to keep that in mind, because this is not just an academic experience you're going through here at Springfield. It's really a life experience when we're talking about cultural competence development. I'd like to share with you something that matters to me a lot. Every day I do a reading that comes from this little book called 365 Days of Walking the Red Road. And this book is written about American Indian proverbs. It shares American Indian proverbs, which really are quite spiritual, which really are quite wellness-oriented, and it talks about the worldview of American indigenous people. So this one quote from today is, in our language, there is no way to say inferior or superior, because equality, because we are all equal. So again, that's in the spirit of what we talk about here in the classes that you're learning about, the spirit of inclusion, the spirit of equality, and not to go with this inferiority, superiority mindset that I think often pervades. This other quote is from tomorrow's reading, and it says, "I can tell my children that the way to get honor is to go work and be good men and women." Very practical. Just go work, be good people, be good men and women. So these are readings that I take in every day because I see them as a way of grounding me, sense of inspiration, and as a person who wants to continue on my journey of becoming culturally competent, I've taken information from different sources. So I just shared that with you, and it's a great little book that I think I got many years ago at an airport. So I'll tell you that. So here we are on a college campus. This is 2019. So here are some of the issues I think that are facing students today, as well as your administrators. Some of these probably look familiar, right? People buying their students access to school. Okay, fortunately, they're getting caught right now and serving jail time. We have nationwide shootings on a regular basis. This is part of the climate we're living in. We have students or people who are being denied actually to come to school in the U.S. because of visas. They can't have a visa. Certain countries are being denied access to come to the university. The oppression of immigrant children and families. That's another social political reality that we're living through right now. And then this book by Paul Touch about broken promises of higher education discusses the aspirations of many students to go to higher education, to go to school, and then finding that when they're in school, they're not getting the kind of support they need to graduate, to succeed. So these are all of the, what I would call social political issues that you and I are living through right now. We hear about them on social media. We read about these on the news or hear about these on the news. And these are also issues that are affecting the clients you're working with and their families. So it's a very tough time right now for many people. You know, some folks can stay away from it or say, this doesn't affect me. You know, I don't have an issue I've not been in a situation where there's been a nationwide shooting, but you don't know. There was a shooting at a church in Pelham, New Hampshire this weekend. Okay? A wedding. I mean, things are happening like that. The woman who was shot in her own home in Dallas over the weekend. Oh, we're always having, it's not that I'm always looking over my shoulder, but when I read the news and I think about the work all of you are doing as counselors or preparing to do as counselors, you may be on the line to be facing some of the consequences of some of the social political tragedies that are going on, or of students at the counseling center. How many of you have worked at the counseling? Do they do practicum at counseling center?
No, some do.
Some do? Okay, you're going to be, you know, talking with students at the counseling center who are coming in with issues as well that, you know, you're not facing, but they're facing, and, you know, this is where being culturally aware, culturally prepared, makes a big difference in how you're going to be able to help. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, who has a question for me? Thank you, and tell me who you are.
Aaron, and what are 2 core values you have as a leader?
2 core values that I have as a leader. Okay.
It doesn't mean the most important, but 2 that
Yeah.
these are.
Sure.
There.
2 core values I have as a leader: integrity. Okay? I have to really abide by ethical standards and just being a person of integrity, so that would be one. And I think the second is compassion. So those are 2 core values of mine. And I think as counselors, some of that comes into part of our training as well. Integrity and compassion. Thank you, Erin. Now, these are questions that often come up. How does one begin a path toward cultural competency development? What does culturally relevant care look like? And so forth. So how does one begin a path toward cultural competency development? So I'm going to expect that you are going to answer.
I would sure hope so.
All right. I'm sure you've all, prepared to answer that first question. So, how does one begin a path? There's no right or wrong answers. Okay, and tell me your name.
I'm Pat. Yeah, so I think it kind of starts with just with a level of curiosity and a level of humility that you don't necessarily have the built-in knowledge of all the cultures that you need to be culturally aware in all scenarios.
Great. Curiosity and humility. I don't know it all. You don't know it all. I've been at this for a long time. I don't know it all. So I continue to be curious about people. Thank you, Erin.
And I think, kind of going off of that, I kind of think one thing I know is I know nothing. And so based upon that, because you want to seek out this curiosity, that you're going to experience different things. You're going to go out of your way to intentionally, consciously make choices to, I want to go to this country to experience a certain culture. I want to go into this part of a neighborhood to experience what's there. And not just going there to say you've been there where all the tourists go, but actually being in a certain demographic.
Very good. Thank you. How about on this side of the room? How do you being your path towards cultural competency development?
My name is Ken.
Speak up, Kent.
Sorry, Ken. I feel like the first step is just having a sense of empathy. Like you want to truly understand the struggles that people go through, and by doing that, you learn how to best help them. So I think empathy is definitely like the first step.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, empathy. Empathy is, again, we learn about empathy. It's not an automatic, but I think if you look at the other words that were shared, you arrive at empathy through a developmental process of building a relationship. We were talking earlier about the theory of cultural relational theory, which is about knowing the other person, but engaging with that other person to know them. And it comes out of women's work. Women's development is cultural relational theory work. What is culturally relevant care? What is culturally relevant care? I don't want to point at you. Oh, good, thank you. And your name is?
I'm Brooke.
Brooke, okay.
I'd say culturally relevant care is just, as the counselor, it's your responsibility to be aware of cultural norms that your clients may have, different experiences that they may have had. So for instance, if you're working with a student that comes from like a Hispanic or from a Hispanic family in Springfield or something, having the understanding of not only the Hispanic culture, but also the culture within Springfield, and just kind of doing your best to just.
Excellent. Okay, so it's not just the individual's family culture, but the Springfield culture, where someone was raised, and the norms and the values in that part of Springfield for that matter. Excellent. One more. What is culturally relevant care? And your name is?
Joe.
Joe, go ahead.
For me, one of the things I think of is really meeting the client where they are and trying to do your best to bridge that gap initially when you're building rapport, to try and meet them and show that you care about them and you're going to try and be there for them.
Okay. And what does that mean that you're doing as you're trying to engage them that way? What is going on for you?
You're really asking a lot of questions. You're listening. You're showing that you're caring. You're showing that you're trying to be there, and even though you may not be able to fully relate to where they are, and to actually walk in their shoes, to be able to get as close as you can and put in the effort on your end.
Okay, so you're showing your interest as well. And you had your hand up, so I'm going to ask you.
That's exactly what I was going to say too. It's just like being aware and also like being okay with being uncomfortable.
Good.
Just like being open to that.
Good. Being aware and being okay to be uncomfortable. All right? And that's really so important, to allow yourself to be uncomfortable. Darn it, because we don't talk enough about how our emotions get to us when we're in new situations and we feel uncertain, or we feel confused, or we feel a little stupid. Okay? That's all okay, and that's all very normal in this whole process. Now we're going to just ask one more question here, and what gets in the way of culturally relevant care? What do you think gets in the way of culturally relevant care?
My name's Nina. I think one thing that gets in the way, at least what I've experienced, is my own biases, as well as my own like failure to acknowledge the ways in which like being white or my upbringing or my culture has like allows me to interact with other cultures or diverse populations, and how those biases affect that can get in the way sometimes, or my like grappling with certain things that may be difficult to look at within myself and my relationship to those issues.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to admit our biases. It's, you know, we might at some level be conscious of them, but then we get uncomfortable, okay? And then we say, what do I do with these biases? How do I, you know, you don't want to enact them, but at some level you have to go somewhere with them, right? So thank you very much. One more. What gets in the way of culturally relevant care? Yes, Dan.
Touch back on what Karen mentioned, which is not knowing what you don't know, and not acknowledging your deficits in just what you understand, and also not being comfortable going to build those competencies.
And admitting what you don't know. Yeah, and you know what I say, we all make faux pas, we all make mistakes, right? And it's better to, what's the expression about something, saying something and then ask for forgiveness later? You know, you can kind of step into something and make a mistake, but then admit that, oh, I'm so sorry, or I didn't, you know, please help me here, because I didn't mean to hurt. So, you know, admitting mistakes is terribly important in our profession, because, well, we're people and we don't know everything. So we're going to go to the cultural competencies model that we've already been focusing on. Now, all of you are counselors, but you're also educators. In the process of being a counselor, you're also educating yourself and educating your clients. So we're looking at this model here, and what we've been talking about is awareness of our own cultural values and biases. I'm sure that's part of the training that you're going through right now, and you've spoken to that. The awareness of others' ways of being, you know, how someone else, the norms in the community, I forgot who said it, there you go, the norms, you know, how other people live their lives. We also talk about it as worldview. And one of the models that I've liked a lot in terms of worldview comes from these cultural anthropologists, Kroger and Kluckholm. You teach Kroger and Kluckholm somewhere along the way? Okay. Kroger and Kluckholm did their research in communities outside of the United States, Indonesia, primarily the Indonesian area, the Philippines, and so forth. So they lived among people because they were curious about how people practice their relationships, and they came out with 5 different constructs about worldviews in the 5 categories. Human nature, nature, relationships, activity, and time, okay. So they said there are different worldviews for each of these. So in terms of human nature, there's something, what they learned by living with these people is that people can be seen as basically good, basically bad, basically good and bad. So if do you see people as basically good? Is that your worldview? Do you see people as basically bad? Do you see people as basically good and bad? So we all have an orientation to human nature, and it's not so global always. It could be to certain, we may say all the people in that neighborhood are basically bad, okay? Or we might say all the people in that neighborhood are basically good. And so that kind of bias, or it's a bias, or worldview can also predispose us to assess someone from that neighborhood in that way before we even get to know them. Okay, so that's the construct of human nature. Then the construct of nature is that some people fear nature because of the storms, or if you live in Florida, you ought to fear nature, the hurricanes, or people are really in harmony with nature, and that's very much an American Indian believe in harmony with nature. And what's the third one? Okay, so they fear nature, they're in harmony with nature. I can't remember the third one. Okay, then it comes to relationships. So you look it up, Cloak and Kroger. I'm surprised I remember all 5 of them. Okay, then relationships are, people believe in collateral relationships, that everything is related. Okay? We all have collateral or collaborative relationships. Other people believe in individualism. Okay? And then other people will believe, so we have individualism, collateral, and what's the third one? Oh, top down, hierarchical. Hierarchical, so there's structure, okay? So hierarchical, individualistic, and collateral relationships. And then we have the construct of time, and some people, cultures, live in the past, you know, revere the past, others revere the present, and others revere the future, okay? So we're here in the United States. What is our time modality in the United States? What do you think?
I think kind of all of them, but probably more past.
You think more past? Why?
I think we're real proud of our history here.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the American culture.
Okay. All right. Someone else?
I'm PJ. The future, I think a lot of us are forward thinking and thinking about plans for the future, raising families, what jobs we're going to get, what our education is going to look like in the future. So,
Okay.
Especially me personally, the future is huge for me.
Future is your personal orientation. Anyone else living in the present?
Yeah, let's fill in that gap, I guess. I kind of think about our really rapid news cycles and how the world, how the country is so reactive to things that are happening, the instant gratification of internet usage, social media. I think we're pretty present focused in that regard.
Okay. And so you may have clients who are very present oriented, and you may have clients who are very future oriented. But technology has really pushed us into the future and present. And I think that there's a lot of people cherish the past and revere the past, but I think in terms of the mode right now, it's pretty present and future. And then the 5th construct is activity. So people are either in the doing mode, being and becoming mode, or I think the third one is being. So you're a doer, you kind of are a beer, you kind of just contemplate your navel, or you're in a being and becoming, which is more developmental, which is very much counseling, right? Being and becoming. So do you know which mode you're in? Are you a doer or a being person, or a being and becoming? Or all of them? What do you think?
I feel like in regards to this program, I think being and becoming.
Being and becoming.
Kind of in the process of.
Sure. Yeah, you're in this program, you're in a being and becoming mode, absolutely. So just looking at how some of these cultural constructs apply to your own education, your own educational process. So when I asked earlier, how do you get on this pathway to becoming culturally competent? Well, you're in this being and becoming mode, cultural mode, which is putting you in that place of becoming more culturally competent as well. And then finally, we like to think that all of this helps us become more culturally informed in order to express the interpersonal behavior that's culturally relevant. But along the ways, I think we've already said emotions come up. So we may experience what we call cognitive dissonance and emotional dissonance. Okay, that discomfort, I think somebody mentioned discomfort. So that's very normative in the process of becoming a counselor, is cognitive and emotional dissonance. Now, have you all experienced cognitive and emotional dissonance? Yes, I hope so. I mean, I would think that's, again, if you haven't, then something's not computing.
We're not doing our job.
Okay, Allison's not doing her job, yeah. So that's very relevant in our field, and we have to be able to acknowledge that discomfort, that emotional dissonance when we experience it, because that's part of growth. Remember how they say no change, or what is the expression, no gain, no change, no change?
No pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain, no pain, no gain, right. No pain, no gain. So part of growing is change and some discomfort and some pain. We've all gone through it as educators and as counselors. And if you understand that no pain, no gain, what does that allow you to do with your clients? If we say no pain, no gain with our clients, then what is the emotion that we can now have with our clients? Somebody said it before.
Empathy.
Empathy. Empathy. Okay. You know, we're helping clients to understand themselves, to change, and it's hard. It's hard, but if we don't appreciate that ourselves, then we aren't going to have the compassion and empathy for them and the processes they're going through. So, no pain, no gain, and we'll keep going. Okay. So here's, let's see if we have time for this little exercise. Okay, I think we do. All right. So you just need a partner. So 2 people partnering together. Okay. So I don't care if you know them or not know them. You just need a partner. Good. Yeah, you guys are going to be a threesome here, okay? You need, oh, Mike, Dr. DeAndrea needs a partner, so he might come over to one of you. Okay, you have a partner? Are you in the class? No. Okay, all right. Okay, here's the rule. Okay, remember, the title of this exercise is Silent Interview, which means you are going to interview your partner without speaking to him or her. Okay, got it? Okay. Now, clearly I'm telling you to make assumptions or guesses. I acknowledge this at the very beginning. You're going to write down, each of you is going to write down the answers to these questions about your partner by looking at them. By looking at them. Where did they grow up? What is their ethnicity? What type of work did their parents do? What kind of student were they in high school? How many languages do they speak? And what kind of music do they like? Am I correct that? Do they like? Okay, those are your 5 or 6 questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're going to answer about your partner. Just write them down. And then I'll give you about 3 minutes to do that, and then we'll exchange the answers. So we'll find out how correct you were or how incorrect you were. Okay? So go for it. Without talking. Okay, 30 seconds, please. Okay, time out. All right, now you have the next 5 minutes to share. You tell your partner tells you, and then we'll come back and have a quick debrief. Okay, go for it.
And then when I got to college, I was like, you know, like. I'm always like on the
being so responsive so quickly. Well, looks like you had a few laughs after you did the interviews. Correcto? Yeah. Bueno, how many got all 6 correct? Did anyone have all 6 correct? I just have to ask. Okay, sometimes, if I've only had it happen, I think once. All right, how many of you had 5 correct? All right, 4?
Wow.
Okay, 4, okay, that's pretty good. 4 of you, okay, 5 of you did. 3? Okay, the 2?
Yay.
Wow.
Good job.
1? Okay. All right. I don't want to ask, did anyone not get them all at all? But that's okay if you didn't get any of them right. That can happen. All right. Tell me about this exercise. What was the easiest question to answer? In your mind, what was the easiest question to answer? Aaron?
I think what kind of student were they in high school was probably the easiest one, only because we had a couple classes together, and like just seeing her character, now she is in classes, and you can definitely go, wow, she's definitely a studious person. Sometimes that could happen over a year or overnight, but with her, it was just like, she's definitely in the A or B range, definitely involved, and maybe overly involved, but definitely doing some.
Okay, so it was pretty good. That was correct. You were a good student in high school. What was the easiest for you?
For me?
Yes.
Definitely the student one.
The student one.
Yeah,
Okay.
and just knowing that, like, I know Cam a little bit, and I know that he used to be in another major, which required, like, you to be a really high-functioning, well-rounded being, so I was like.
So he's the less well. We got it. Thank you. Okay, so Cam, you're very high functioning. Good. Okay. What was the most difficult question or questions to answer? What were the most difficult questions? Yes?
What type of work their parents did?
What type of work did their parents do? Did everyone agree with that? Yeah. Okay. What made that difficult?
I feel like it's kind of hard to make assumptions about if you don't know the person, like just based
Okay.
off
All right. So
looking at them in silence. It was kind of hard to
okay.
decipher.
So that made it hard. What else made that question hard to answer?
I'm sorry, I was gonna answer.
Oh, okay. Oh, you don't want to answer. Okay, I know you don't want to do because you're a professor. What made that hard to answer?
Because you also kind of have to assume that you have 2 parents, and I feel like that's kind of difficult because that might,
Yeah.
you have to kind of take that into consideration, and then also you can't really judge a person or their parents based off of them because they might not even have any contact with them, or just there's many different scenarios that could be occurring.
Yeah, so you don't want to be offensive. Go ahead.
Well, that was exactly what I was going to say. Like, I mean, we had just answered before that, but what is their ethnicity? And I didn't want any biases based on what my assumption about his ethnicity was to influence the work that their parents did.
Ah, yeah, so you saw the two maybe relating together. Okay. The one thing about the parents, how many of you are first generation students going to college? First generation going to college. Okay. So not, a few of you are, not everybody is, but oftentimes first generation college students tells you that the parents didn't go to college, right? That's really what that means. And so their parents may not have had the resources to go to college, and they had different kind of work. They probably weren't teachers because that requires a college degree. The other question about ethnicity, what makes that a hard question to answer? What makes that a hard question to answer?
Can I remember the difference between ethnicity and nationality?
I was going to say ethnicity / nationality. Yeah. So what makes that hard to answer?
Well, I always think, like, for example, with my partner who is Puerto Rican, and for folks who don't know, folks who are Puerto Rican have a range in skin color because there's a lot of African and Eastern European influences, and she's fairly light-skinned and is often assumed to be white, and so I think that's the hardest thing when you're looking at somebody's just physical appearance. If they appear white or have certain other features, you could assume that, but neglect that they are not white.
Correct. So again, the visibility, and we're very focused on color in this country, in a lot of countries. We call that colorism. And we may make a mistake when we say that person's probably of this ethnicity or that ethnicity and be entirely incorrect about that. Or again, with people who visibly are white, we automatically attribute a particular ethnicity. We wouldn't think they're Puerto Rican or Mexican or Cuban or another ethnic background. So these are things that come up with your clients, aren't they? You know, you're meeting someone for the first time and all you have in front of you is a person who looks a certain way. And you may have an association to a person who is visible that way. Dr. Janet Helms uses the acronym VERG, V-E-R-G, people who are visibly ethnic, racial group, V-E-R-G, members. So people who are VERG often have a harder time to negotiate things in different settings. There's assumptions made about someone based on their VERG appearance. So as you work with clients, you may find that some of your clients have had more incidents of racial discrimination. It could be that there's also, in terms of sexual orientation, there is also that kind of discrimination and prejudice that goes on. May not be color, but there may be other attributes that people look at and think, and make a judgment about someone. So I think when we look at the silent interview, just go back one, Alec. What we're focused on here is the awareness of our own cultural values and biases, right? And our exposure to different situations and how we develop these values and biases. When I grew up in Lorain, Ohio, there was a Mexican community there, and then, excuse me, I think I was about 10 years old when a number of people from Puerto Rico moved into my community because of the steel mill and the Ford plant and so forth. And I saw the prejudice that occurred, you know, towards the Puerto Rican people because they came from an island and they dressed differently. They spoke Spanish differently. And people had this automatic response, well, they're not like the Mexicans. But what does that mean? So we look at that in terms of the intragroup, also the intergroup dynamics, intergroup prejudice, but also based on the visible appearance, and then also based on the way people spoke the language. There was some disparagement made of that, Puerto Ricans in our community, and that was at that point in time. So always aware of how that plays out in different enclaves, ethnic enclaves. We'll come back to that. So the second dimension of the competencies model is getting to know other people and knowledge building about other people, understanding cultural context. So I'm just going to share a couple knowledge building slides that seem relevant to the work we're doing here in Springfield in this program. So if you hit the next one. So I looked at some of the demographics for Springfield just last night. And if you go on, you Google Springfield, it's called the City of Firsts. Why is it called the City of Firsts? Those of you who are in school here. Or maybe how many grew up in Springfield, by the way? 1, 2, no, you didn't, just 2, okay. So why is it called the City of Firsts? Anybody? Okay, the first dictionary was written here or developed here, was published here, the first dictionary. Huh? You didn't know that? Well, see, now you know something more about
You need to take a trip down to the Springfield History Museum.
Okay. And there were
The college just renewed their, connection with the Springfield Museum, so you can go for free with your college ID, and you can learn all about the city.
Okay.
There you go.
So that was one of the first in Springfield. George Washington did something here at the Armory. Okay. So that's another historic piece. And there was some other manufacturing first here in Springfield. So it's kind of cool if you're going to spend time here to know about the city. Now, in terms of the demographics, Springfield is a very diverse city, as you probably know, or maybe don't, in terms of the distribution of the population here. Even though American Indian people were here for many years before the white settlers arrived, there's a very small part of the population currently. But you have this great dispersion of white, African American, Black, and Latinx. And Latinx people, of course, with the Puerto Rican population that's been here a long time. I think it's Puerto Rican, there's Guatemalan, there's Dominican, and people from El Salvador, but the largest population, even when I was living in Boston, we knew about the Puerto Rican population here in Springfield. So that creates kind of diversity in the city, which is not common in a lot of small college cities. Okay, and this is a small, 153,000 people in Springfield, so you're not a big city. So for a city this size, you have a lot of cultural diversity. And it's something that enriches the city and probably will enrich your experience in the counseling program in terms of your training, because you'll be in agencies or in schools where you're going to be working with culturally diverse populations and their parents. So just to take note of where you are in terms of the demographics. The next slide, please. Now, I talked earlier about the social political climate that we're all living in terms of the incidences of shootings, the incidence of laws that separate children and parents. But I also keep up with the demographics on hate crimes in the United States, because that's where oftentimes you least expect incidents to occur, is like in your backyard. And the Southern Poverty Law Center is probably the best resource for understanding where hate crimes occur. They are a bunch of lawyers. They, advocate for people's civil rights, and they're often very successful. One of the facts that is really, I didn't put it up here, but after President Obama was elected, the number of hate crimes just shot up in the United States. Hate crimes and hate groups. Hate groups first, and then the hate crimes. And then there's another population of groups that's called patriot groups. And patriot groups consider themselves like the militia. And so a lot of patriot groups formed in the United States. So I looked up what the hate groups are. There are 14 hate groups in Massachusetts. 14, which is, compared to other states, that's a small number. However, in Springfield, these are the two groups. One is called Abiding Truth Ministries, which is an anti-LGBT group, okay? Anti-LGBT, so you just want to be aware of that. And then the other is the Nation of Islam, which is a Black nationalist group. Okay? And so again, espousing Black nationalism, which is, in some ways people would say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, then it's not considered a group that's inclusive. It's not considered a group that would value white people or people of other backgrounds. So just to, you should know what's going on in your backyard, okay? So we have those groups, and in Massachusetts. Now, how many of you heard of the book burning at Georgia State University? You did, you did, you did, you did, okay. Either Thursday or Friday last week, there was a book burning. What does book burning signify? What does book burning signify? We'll start there with the question. Go ahead. What's your name?
Kyle.
Kyle, go ahead, Kyle.
Disrespect.
Disrespect, what else?
That was what I was planning to say.
Okay, that's all you're gonna say, disrespect. Anybody else? What is book burning? Yes, your name is?
Ben.
Ben, okay.
Intentional destruction of knowledge.
Thank you. Intentional destruction of knowledge, wow. What else? Anybody else? What is book burning? Sure.
I'm Corey, trying to quash an ideal. Trying to change an ideal or to make it go away.
Make it go away, okay, crush it, make it go away, okay. Anyone else? Book burning. When you think of book burning, what images come to mind? Anybody? When you think of book burning, what images come to mind?
I think of a mob of people surrounding a big bonfire and just throwing whatever book they happen to be burning or whatever collection of books they happen to be
Okay.
burning. Yeah.
Those were the images that went viral. The students were standing around burning the book. Okay, this is heavy duty. So you know the story, so tell us what happened.
I mean, we just kind of discussed it in class earlier, but from what I remember, what we discussed, it was a Latinx woman who was there speaking about white privilege, and basically she was not saying things that were very amenable to some of the people in the audience, and they got annoyed by it, and they said they basically decided to start burning the books. There were death threats. She was not speaking to her, and her next stop was canceled. She kind of had to be protected as she left Statesboro.
Yeah, yeah, that's serious. That's very heavy. And I've done some work with Georgia Southern, so when I read this, I just kind of like, really? But you never know. So what are those students who do the book burning? What are they demonstrating to you? What are they demonstrating?
I think an attempt to silence, to intimidate, to quiet.
Okay. What else?
Hatred.
Hatred. What else? Good. Those are all good. Anyone else?
Aggression.
Aggression. Yeah, absolutely aggression. Kyle?
Possibly fear. I don't think they would acknowledge that, but they might be afraid of that message.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Intolerance. Go ahead.
Resistance to difference.
Resistance to difference.
Defiance.
Defiance. Right. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Ignorance.
Oh, thank you. Ignorance as well. Okay. Ignorance as well. I think. Go ahead.
And it's collective. That's the biggest piece. It's collective.
So it's not just one person, it's a group then.
And reinforcing white supremacy. Reinforcing white supremacy.
Reinforcing white supremacy, and that's something that came out in the story afterwards, and she talked about white privilege. Okay? It was part of her discourse. She had a book she'd written, and she was talking about her book, and then she brought up white privilege. And a few of the people in the audience thought that she was being too critical of white people, and thought she had no business being critical of white people by saying white privilege. What has happened too is, I think you said fear, is that everybody knows that the demographics talk about the majority-minority country that the U.S. is becoming, and that there are certainly a lot of us who recognize that instills fear that the white superiority is being threatened. And if you look at a lot of the white nationalist groups, a lot of them are concerned about losing their status as the white superior cultural group in the country. But we have that reaction to it right now. And the administration says, well, we have to accept that there is free speech. But burning a book is like all of you said, is sort of the height of hate. It is the height of hate. Were you going to say something?
Saying there were some reports that they did it outside of near where she was staying.
Yes.
Which kind of takes it from more of a demonstration of kind of not believing this idea to more of a threat of
her life.
Of her life, and I mean she got them, but also just a threat of we don't just hate you, we don't want you around at all.
So a threat of her life, intimidation. Yeah, they moved her out of their hotel where she was staying because this is not a safe place. I mean, it's like it conjures up all those images that I saw on cowboy movies where they would try to get somebody out of jail because all the people were going to come in and take them out and shoot them or something like that. But it was that kind of intensity, and yeah, she ended her stop her speaking tour at Georgia Southern because they have two campuses, one in Savannah and one in Statesboro. So she never went to Savannah. But I think we, as, again, counselors in training, counselors need to be mindful of all of these incidents that are really occurring throughout the country. It's important to give them press and important to examine how we think about these, you know. Does it make us uncomfortable? What if conversations about white privilege come up, but I'm sure you have them in class and so forth, so, you know, it makes people uncomfortable when we talk about white privilege, and as though it's, you know, something to deny, because there is white privilege. So, I mean, it's not about saying yes or no, it's about looking at how that's part of the climate in the United States. So, who has a question for me that you haven't asked me yet? Now that I've created such discomfort. So go ahead, Kyle. You are Kyle.
Yeah.
You're Kyle and you're Corey. Who's Corey?
Right here.
Yeah, those are the names of two of my grandsons, so.
So this kind of came out from our discussion in class earlier, so I was curious what you would say about this. How do you work to create a safe space for someone who looks different from you? What do you say?
When you say how do you create a safe space?
How do you make them feel safe around you? And part of me asking this is, as a white male, I need to be aware of that, and I can only do so much because there are a lot of good reasons that people would feel unsafe around me, but what can I do to help with that, to show that I care?
In counseling? You mean in a counseling situation?
Yeah, but also just in general.
Oh, in general? Okay, well, again, I think the setting matters.
Sure.
I think the setting matters in terms of how you make someone comfortable. I mean, if it's a social setting and someone is new in that setting, it's how you approach that person and speak to them and welcome them and say, hi, I haven't seen you before, Corey. I'm Kyle and I'm in the counseling program, or whatever you need to say to open the door to a conversation. You know, so if it's a social setting, okay. And now in a counseling setting is, you know, you can start out with your typical questions in counseling. I mean, you are aware of the difference. That other person may also be aware of the difference, or is probably aware. I think the normal questions are, you know, what brings you here? Isn't that the first question you ask someone in counseling?
I guess, I mean, beyond just building rapport, like getting to a place where they feel comfortable sharing more personal information, beyond just like, yeah, we can talk to each other, but they might feel unsafe just because of the racial divide.
Because of the difference, okay. Wow. I mean, I could think of a bunch of stuff, but what would some of you say?
I mean, I'm always supportive of addressing and acknowledging multicultural differences the very first time that you meet a client. And there's a lot of pushback about this. I think in the field there's differences of opinion, and largely they're from white counselors. But I think, you know, culture is a huge part of who somebody is, and so why not embrace that the very first time that you meet somebody?
Okay. Someone else. Go ahead, Pat.
I mean, I think I would say, you said beyond just building rapport, I think frankly that the building of rapport is what helps create that safe space, that understanding between you and whoever your client might be, that you have a therapeutic alliance with them, and that regardless of the racial differences, which when I come up from time to time, I think acknowledging it's definitely the right thing to do when it does, but maintaining that rapport and having that level of unconditional positive regard is going to be really important for creating that safe space you're looking for.
Good. Anyone else? Dr. DeAndrea?
I think, you know, one of our dear brothers, Thomas Barham, really articulates. So the gentleman back there is standing next to the camera. What's your name, sir?
CJ.
Oh, no, this gentleman.
Oh, Kevin.
I'm sorry.
Oh, Kevon.
Say again.
Kevon.
Okay, so if you
Trayvon?
Kevon.
Tavon.
Yeah.
Okay, Tavon.
So if you and I were in a counseling relationship, and it was the first time we met each other, right? One of the things we are impressed with is Dr. Parham has said, I would say something like, you know, I'm glad you're here, Kevon. I'm going to put your intake file down here, I noticed that you and I are different right from the get-go, right? I mean, I'm white, you're African American?
Yeah, I'm Jamaican, but.
Jamaican,
Yeah.
okay, that's helpful, okay. And I'm wondering, to get to know each other here, let me ask you, what would be helpful for you to ask me before we get into you? You know, that might help us, you know, kind of deal with our differences here. So what would be helpful for you? And I'm kind of asking you that, pretending like we were alone.
Just be yourself. Don't step out. I don't know. Don't make things awkward, I'll say.
Okay, and what would work for you for me not to make things awkward?
Just being yourself.
Okay, so being myself would be cool with you?
Yeah.
Okay, that feels real good to me. So the point is that we're kind of saying, you know, contrary to the whole past of self-disclosure, right, which is taboo in the past, we're like saying, hey, I'm gonna be open to self-disclose because I need to know what you need to know about me, because apparently there's differences. And then over here in the back of my head, I'm thinking, you know, the climate right now is not cool at all in terms of racial divisiveness in here. So obviously I gotta say something intentionally. So I'm inviting him to get to know me and put him in a power position, because that power differential exists in the counseling relationship. But I always remember Thomas.
That's a good, yeah, Thomas always says that one. Yeah, Kyle, what do you think?
I think that was more my question. That's really helpful to know, and what Dr. Fulmer said as well, like addressing it with intention and not trying to skirt around the issue and calling attention to the fact that we are different and we can't do anything about that other than to say what would be helpful for you. So that you.
But going back to what you said before, is that, oh man, now that puts me in a vulnerable position, right? Like one of the comments I got from an African American adolescent was, what makes you think you have any idea what it's like to be a black man in this society? And it's like, whoa, that's kind of a cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance going on. So we have to make ourselves vulnerable in terms of that, right?
And I think that's a great example, and thank you for participating as well. I've worked with clients from different backgrounds, mostly women over the years. I'm not doing psychotherapy anymore. But whenever I had a Latina client who came to see me, she typically, especially if she was my age or older, she wanted to know about my family. All right, so she really pushed the envelope about, after I remember one in particular, and I found out why she was there, and we spoke in Spanish and so forth. And she says, okay, well, tell me about you. And so it's, because like Michael said, we are told not to do self-disclosure. And I said, well, I'm not from Boston, and I'm Mexican-American. She was from Ecuador. And I said, and she said, well, how come you speak Spanish so well? So then I had to tell her why I spoke, or in my estimation, why I spoke Spanish. But, if I had not gone that way, I would think she would have never come back. It was a matter of using my judgment to say what is going to build a rapport with her, what is going to make her, have more trust in me. And it was like a little self-disclosure is not going to ruin the relationship. And so we went on. No, I think there's some judgment as to what you disclose or how you bring in the conversation. That's not violating anything, in my estimation. It does not violate any ethical code if you do what Michael's demonstration was. So I just think but I'm glad you asked it. I'm really glad you asked that, Kyle. Okay, next. All right, one of my big things is emotional intelligence. How many of you have read the emotional intelligence theories by Daniel Goleman? Okay, very, very relevant to counseling. And the 4 stages of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, self-management of emotions, social awareness, paying attention to who's in the space and what's going on, and then relationship management. And when you look at the cultural competencies that we've been talking about, we're looking at awareness, knowledge, and emotions towards ourselves. How do we feel about ourselves? I mean, do we have internalized sexism? Do we have internalized racism? So awareness and knowledge of our emotions. So that's self-awareness fits in. Then about awareness, knowledge, and emotions towards others. How do we play out our biases? How do we play out our fears, our insecurities when we're working with someone who we experience as different? And it doesn't have to just be racially. It could be in terms of gender. It could be in terms of SES or LGBT identity. Or you heard that someone is from this part of Springfield, and therefore you have ambivalence about working with that person. So your awareness and your self-management of those emotions. And then how you leverage all of that in terms of relationship management. So these are the emotional intelligence stages, and they really line up with cultural competency development. So I want you to keep that in mind, because there's a lot of play that's given to emotional intelligence, but you can't be culturally competent if you're not emotionally intelligent. Okay? You cannot be culturally competent if you're not emotionally intelligent, and you cannot be emotionally intelligent if you're not on a pathway towards cultural competency development. Okay? They just go hand in hand in hand, right? So I just share that with you because, you know, this is a place of continuing to examine some of these theories, some of these models. So what's next? We covered that already. Okay, go backwards now, and we've got at least one more slide to the model. The dimensions of personal identity, which are these ABC dimensions of identity, which social identity relate to all of us. And when you look at the awareness, knowledge, and skills building, the awareness and knowledge, so our awareness of our own biases and assumptions towards people and ourselves based on age. This is where all the isms fall in, right? Ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, prejudice towards people with some form of disability. All of these are the dimensions that we all possess, correct? Okay. And so we call these A dimensions often the ones that are fixed. You know, we are born into many of these dimensions. We can't change them. You know, I cannot change my age, my gender. I could, but majority of us don't change our gender. My ethnicity and race, and social class. I was born into a low-income, first-generation family, and I can have more income, but from a class standpoint, I'm never going to be in some upper-class strata. That's just not, you know, what happens for a lot of people based on your heritage and based on your gender. So all of these are A dimensions that are part of life, but we also form biases and assumptions about people based on these A dimensions, correct? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Okay. Now, if you were to pick out 3 of the dimensions that are most important to you right now at this time in your life, what would those 3 dimensions be? If you were to say, these are my 3 priority dimensions right now, October 2019, what would those 3 priority dimensions be? Brooke?
Are we talking about the individual or
You.
as a society?
No, for you.
So for me, I'd say gender identity, physicality, mental well-being, and social class.
Okay, okay. So in counseling, that would be important for you, that someone not express some sort of disdain for you in terms of your gender, okay, or for your physicality, okay? Someone else, go ahead, Eric.
Physicality, mental well-being, relationship status, and I don't mean that just as romantic, I mean even just friend to friend, either father to son, brother to brother, any relationship status, how that's going, playing out. And a huge one for me is also hobbies and recreational interests. For some reason, always hits me. It's something that people do, why they like doing what they do in their free time. Because it helps out, at least for me, a lot of therapeutic interventions I've at least done so far.
Okay, okay, okay. All right. Anyone else? Go ahead, PJ. PJ or?
Yeah, PJ.
Okay.
Age, race, and sexual orientation.
So why is age important to you?
Age, because as I'm approaching 30, you know, I think time.
30, you said 30, right?
Yeah, I think
Was it
time is
39?
going by. And then race is important because I'm half black, half white, so it's a very, like, for me personally, it's just a very weird kind of biracial status as my dad being black and my mom being white. It especially in this day and age, it's just a very weird dichotomy. And then sexual orientation. I'm a white, or half black, half white, straight male, and that's another thing too. It's like, is it privileged to be like that or whatever? So.
Good questions. Is it privileged to be like that?
Right.
So yeah, where does privilege fit into that? And I'm glad you brought up the word privilege, okay? Because some of these identities are more privileged than others. Some of these identities are more privileged than others. So if you are a senior person in the United States, senior, okay, and that's over 62, believe it or not, your privilege is not the same as that of someone who's 30 or 40. Okay? It's not the same because we don't have that same reverence for age in the United States as they have in other cultures. In the Asian culture, people who are older are revered and protected. We don't have that same kind of reverence towards older people in the United States. So you look at how some of these identities are more privileged than others. If you say men and women, privileged, less privileged. Well, what does the jury say? Who's more privileged?
Men.
Men. Yeah. Okay, this is a patriarchy. We live in a patriarchy. So we have to recognize what that means in terms of women's, how we perceive women, how women have opportunities or don't have opportunities. And then you intersect in that ethnicity and race, okay? And so you have some real dynamics around privilege. Who gets the privilege? Who has the privilege? So all of these interact, okay? You can't say, I'm simply a woman. Okay, I'm a woman who's Mexican American, I'm a woman who's of a certain age, I'm a woman who's heterosexual. So all of those are, some of those are more privileged than others. Got it? Okay. The B dimensions are ones that are less visible. You talked about your hobbies, and we don't know, I don't know what your hobbies are. Maybe they're golf, maybe they're playing bridge, maybe you run. So some of these can be relationship developers with a client in counseling. If you were to write down on an intake, what are your hobbies? Or what do you do in your spare time? Not everybody would resonate with hobbies if English is not their first language. So you might have a way that the relationship develops based on a B dimension. And like Allison, Michael, and I'll just use this as 3 examples. What do we have as our B dimension commonalities? What are our B dimensions, if you were to say, what are these 3 different?
Work experience.
Work experience. Yep. Anything else?
Educational background.
Say that again, educational background. Right, right. And so those sometimes are the common denominators across people, even though there may be a lot of difference in the A dimensions. Okay? So kind of try and find some of those common denominators. Here in the class, you have a lot of common denominators. You're all studying to be counselors. Only a few of you are from Springfield. Where are the rest of you from? Massachusetts? A few of you? New York? Okay. Anyone from California? Oh, see, okay, good. We have an outlier, California, okay. So you're from where?
Seattle.
Seattle, okay, that's where I'm from too. So, we have to look at some of the common denominators, and oftentimes those are in the B dimension when you want to build relationships. And finally, I'll just talk a little bit about the C, because I know we're at the end of our hour, or hour and a half. The C, it's one of these, it's the dimension that probably is very variable. So our social political climate right now has an impact on people in the A and B dimensions. So if you're an unauthorized or an undocumented immigrant right now in the United States, the social political climate is really oppressing you. Okay? You don't know if you're in or you're out. You don't know, most undocumented immigrants have been in the United States more than 10 years. So here you are, you have a job, you have a family and so forth, but the social political climate is, and you're working, is putting that kind of emotional pressure on you, where you don't know if you're going to be picked up tomorrow, or the kids don't know if they come home and their parents are going to be there. So this is always in play, and I talked about that a little earlier, about the role of the socio-political climate in our lives and in the lives of our clients. So to wrap it up, so we're going to, we know advocacy is very important, and you're going to talk about that in your classes. Thank you, Allie. Okay, so go back for 1 second. No, the other one. There. No, the next one. Oh, no, back. Oh, sorry. Michael and all the professors, okay, you're going to use this advocacy competencies model.
There, just back there.
That's the model you're going to be using. Don't look at this over here. So you're going to be using the AC advocacy competency domains, and you're going to talk about that in your class if you haven't already.
Yes.
Okay, so to wrap it up now, so I want to quote, go back one, okay. I want to quote, oh, it didn't come out right. Okay, good, this is the one. How many of you have heard of Dolores Huerta? Who's heard of Dolores Huerta? Oh, okay. Cesar Chavez? Good. Okay, more people, good. So Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were leaders in the civil rights movement for agricultural workers in California. Okay, so everyone knows Cesar Chavez, but they didn't know that Dolores Huerta was right there. She was a school teacher. She left teaching so she could become an active part of the civil rights movement. And she's 89 years old right now. She is trooping around the country. She gets arrested, just like Jane Fonda did the other day. But she gets arrested because she stands up for rights of children. Right now she's working on behalf of children in schools. So I love this quote from her, that every moment is an organizing opportunity, and every person is a potential activist, and every moment is a chance to change the world. I just think that so works for counselors, and so I hope you take that with you and remember that we all have a chance to change the world. Okay?
Thank you. And I appreciate all of you that have sat through class, work all day, class, another class, and thank you for coming and being engaged. If you're one of our potential students and you're thinking about joining the counseling department, because I know there might be a few in here, please make sure you check in with myself or one of the other faculty. We did invite future potential students, and I forgot to mention. And also to you folks online, thank you so much for joining. We have, as many of you know, 4 campuses around the country, and they're online joining in.